Well, let me tell you why leader development is so important. I'm absolutely convinced that if you look at the Doctrine PF domains, and that's, you know this from your studies if you don't, go back and look at it in our doctrine. Doctrine, organizations, training, leader development, material, personnel, finance, facilities. The point is that of all those domains, the one that we cannot fail to accomplish is leader development. Why do I say that? Because generally speaking, we normally get the future wrong. We don't do it intentionally, and we don't get it wrong dramatically in most cases. But we do get it wrong. And so we tend to end up with organizations that are not exactly right. And in fact, one of my experiences in my almost 35 years is you never really go to war with the organization you have. Okay, so we get the organizations more or less incorrect. We normally don't have the right material. We normally don't give you exactly the right guidance, the right orders, the right policies. Those things all get adjusted over time as we understand the environment. But what we have to have right is our leader development so that you can take those imprecise organizations, that imprecise guidance, and that sometimes somewhat inadequate material and apply it on the battlefield in cities, outside of cities, to accomplish the mission you're given. And that's about leader development. And I'll give you just one personal example by way of demonstrating that, I think, pretty clearly. When I took command of the 1st Armored Division in the spring of 2003, it had just finished its march up into Baghdad as part of the initial stages of Operation Iraqi Freedom. And the initial stages of Iraqi Freedom had the touch, taste, feel of a major combat or traditional operation against the Republican Guard. Although even then, if you recall your history, which for you is history, for me it's current events, but if you recall that period of time, we were beginning to see the introduction of some irregulars called Fedayeen. But the point is, the first part of that thing was a major combat traditional operation. And I had an organization that was well suited to that, and my background and experiences were well suited to that. And so the mission was, General, take that hill, take that river line, protect this flank, do this reconnaissance and force. And those were all terms, and they were missions with which I was very familiar, and off we went and did it. But when you get to Baghdad and your mission is changed to establish a safe and secure environment in Baghdad, that's not exactly what we were prepared for. Whatever we tell you now, that's not what we were prepared for. Nor did we have an organization suited to do it, nor did we have material necessarily optimized for it. And certainly the guidance was a bit thin in those days. But it was the ability of junior leaders, and I'll define those roughly in terms of the brigade commanders and below, who could understand a complex problem and who could understand that those kind of problems always exist in the context of other problems, and who could therefore adapt their organizations, suggest how the guidance might be amended, take the material given and use it for purposes that might have been considered innovative at the time, that we were able to, over time, prevail in that environment. That will happen to you, I suspect, at some point in your career. And that's why leader development is job one, as I just described. Now, let me define, I think, with a little more granularity what we will expect of you as you enter the ranks here shortly. Because you'll hear and probably have heard, or you'll read, and I hope you are doing a lot of reading. There's plenty of very rich, important material out there, not just in the military journals and books, but in other academic venues as well that talk about leader development and adaptability. But you'll read about all the things we want you to be. We want you to be, and some of them are really pretty abstract. We want you to be competent. That's not abstract, and I'll come back to that. We want you to be broad. I don't know how broad, but we can talk about that. We want you to be able to operate in a joint interagency, intergovernmental, and multinational environment. Sure we do. The question is when. We want you to be culturally astute. That's also true. The question is how much. We want you to be courageous. That's not abstract. That's an imperative. We want you to be grounded in Army values. That's right. And you're already somewhat, and in fact, in large measure, taking those steps by virtue of your service here today. And we want you to be able to defeat increasingly complex threats in an environment that we believe will continue to become more complex. Let me talk about competency for a second, because I think where you are in your careers, we have to make sure we don't misrepresent what we expect of you. You're going to be second lieutenants. We're going to give you a platoon of some number of people. You're going to get a series of great non-commissioned officers who will be under your command, and you'll be told to prepare to go to combat. What that says to you, I hope, is that you have to master your weapon system, you have to master small unit tactics, and you have to be capable from the start of building a team among the men and women who are assigned to your care. And I'd suggest to you that in terms of your immediate goals in life, that's the goal you should aspire to. You should try to become the master of your weapon system, the master of small unit tactics, and the master of skills that build teams, starting with a relationship that you forge and a team that you forge with your non-commissioned officers. And my promise to you is that if you take that on as your immediate objective here in the first few years of your career, the rest of the things that I just described to you will accrue from that. Because it's those initial lessons you learn in building that team, mastering your weapon system, and falling in love with your soldiers, frankly, that will determine for you whether your career is a brief one or an extraordinarily long one. And that's, I think, an important lesson to carry out of here. Now, the other things, you can take into your rucksack as much self-development as you will, and we're in the process of rewriting, actually, our leader development strategy for the Army to get at and to, I think, we aspire to be a little more clear about how leader development accrues over the course of a career. And there's three pillars in leader development that you're probably familiar with. Training, which is the hard skills we'll give you. Education, which is the way we'll teach you how to think, not what to think. And then finally, the experiences we give you. And all three pillars have to complement each other, and all three pillars have to build you into someone who can take my place someday. And so you have some significant personal responsibilities in that regard that we'll try to lay out in our strategy. But as I said, the most important thing to remember today is that as you hit that first platoon, you take a responsibility for everything it does or fails to do. You empower your non-commissioned officers, you lead by example, you master your weapons system, and you fall in love with your soldiers. And if you do that, I think you're going to be fine. I'll tell you that just by way of telling you a little bit about what's ahead, it's pretty clear to us that that future conflict will probably and again here requires a bit of definition and a moment in time against which to benchmark. But when we think about conflict for the next 25 years or so, which is really what you're most interested in, it's pretty clear that we will face a variety of hybrid threats. And if you have not studied the conflicts in Lebanon, Georgia, and Gaza, and in that order, because they're all very illustrative, our adversaries will typically present us with threats that are disruptive, and that can be cyberspace or attacks on infrastructure. Irregular, which tends to be the kind we see most prominently in Iraq and Afghanistan. Regular, which is traditional, and catastrophic, which is weapons of mass destruction. And when you look at all three of those, forget about what we are seeing in Iraq and Afghanistan, although I could argue that we see all of those elements of conflict presented to us at various times, even in those conflicts. You can certainly see that in those three conflicts outside of United States control that we've seen all of those.